This week, we talk about what to look for when shooting into the light. Hi, everybody. This is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame. This week, I want to talk about shooting into the light. With a lot of the photographs that I see submitted to the Candid Frame Flickr pool and elsewhere, most of the scenes are pretty evenly lit. Just because of the nature of the time that most people get out, it's mostly during the middle of the day. You may see some photographers that get up early to take advantage of the beautiful quality of light in the morning or shooting later in the afternoon. But if you look through our pool, mostly it's fairly flat, maybe some directional light. But there are times when you want to do something much more interesting with a light when you don't have the opportunity of shooting at twilight, let's say. And one of the things that you can start looking for is looking for scenes where you're actually shooting into the light. Now, it may be the sun is very low on the horizon, and you can shoot that way, or you're just inside of a structure walking out through, say, an archway or a passageway where light is coming through a window or a doorway, and then you can leverage it in a variety of different ways. Now, the most common way people use this quality of light is to create a silhouette. But having that quality of light and just creating a silhouette in and of itself doesn't result in an interesting shot, because I think you still have to pay attention to many of the things that we discuss on this channel all the time, like line and shape and gesture, and sometimes even color. And I've gotten three images that will help me to explore this a little bit further. So let's take a look at the pictures. Here we have a shot by Guilherme Leão. This was created with a Fujifilm X100T at 1/400th of a second, f8, ISO 800. Now, this is a standard shot in terms of using light to render silhouettes. So we have the sun setting. It's probably already fallen below the horizon, and these guys appear to be playing soccer. So you have these multiple figures in the frame, and you have what is serving as the goal for these young men as they play this sport. So you can see that the exposure is biased for the highlight. You get that detail of the sky, especially the clouds, and we get that nice saturated color as a result. And we have the action of the figures. Now, just having them in silhouette in and of itself doesn't make this a really exceptional shot. But for me, what really makes the shot really interesting is the body language of all the various players that are in the scene. You have this very two dominant figures in the frame, and we have this one guy in the very center who's leaning forward. I really can't tell whether he's serving as the goalie or not. I'll assume that he is, but just the way he's sort of leaning in adds a graphic element that's very strong and very forward moving. So even though the shutter speed is freezing the movement of the subject, there's a lot of implied motion that's resulting from his body language. Then we have the person on the right. I love how the elbow is crooking out, creating a nice triangle. We have his left arm hanging down. You have this figure on the far left that is moving forward. And then you have all these other players and all these people, other people walking in on the shore, on the beach, in the distance. And what makes this shot really strong for me is the fact that every person that is in this shot is cleanly defined. Even the small figure of the person wading into the water, their shape is outlined really nicely. And these figures play off of each other. The anchor, of course, is the guy who's leaning forward in the center of the frame, but everyone else has a very distinctive outline and body language, which is all helping not only to serve to tell the story of this moment, but that allow our eye to travel throughout the frame, and we go from one figure to another. And because of the goal, the figure here and also the other figures that are here in this area of the frame are given a sort of a context that wouldn't exist if these were just small figures without the goal. The goal itself, that shape, is a really dramatic an important part of this composition. It's a frame within a frame, which is a motif that's often used in photography, especially street photography, and it's really important for the success of the shot, and it works really nicely. Now, one of the things that you face when you're shooting into the light is that the exposure can be fooled sometimes if you're including a lot of area of shadow. Because the sky dominates the frame, I suspect that the camera, even if it was in the multi-pattern metering system, resulted in a good exposure because you get a little detail in the shadows, especially on the figure on the right. But if you really want to bias the exposure for the sky and you want the blacks to go completely black, you can go to center weighted or spot metering to achieve it. And sometimes I'll do just that when I really don't want any sort of shadow detail and I just want the silhouettes to be rendered as completely black as possible, and to instead emphasize the color and the detail of the bright area of the frame, in this case, the sky. Next, we have a shot by Just Debugging. This was created with a Sony 5100 at 1/100th of a second at f9 ISO 100. Now, here we have a shot that's similar to the previous one in that it is a silhouette, where the figures that are standing in front of this window or doorway are backlit, rendering their outline as a silhouette. Very graphic photograph. And the woman appears to be pressing a button to enter an elevator, and then the child is moving towards the camera and is sort of dancing around impatiently as they wait for the car to arrive. So you're facing the same issue here, in which light is coming from behind the subject, and because the camera is biasing the exposure for the bright area of the frame, the figures and many of the elements in the edges of the frame are rendered into darkness, into a silhouette or into a very high contrast scene. Now, just creating a silhouette of two people or three people in and of itself isn't really interesting. The light may be really good, but you still need some other thing. And for me, the flourish is not so much the bodies of the girl and the woman, but rather the shadow created by the girl. Because you can see that the girl, when you look at her juxtaposed to the woman that's with her, her arm is almost bleeding into the woman's body. There is some separation between them because there seems to be some edge lighting that's on her arm and on her shoulder and on some of her hair on the left-hand side of the frame. But a good part, there's not as clean a separation as you might typically want in the shot. The woman is nicely silhouetted. You can see her arm extending towards the button. You see her shoulders. You see her left arm. You see some definition of the leg. But what's critical here is the shadow of the girl on the floor, because it's then that we get the cleanest definition of the body of anyone within the frame. Because you can see almost the entirety of her body. You see her left foot creating a shadow, which creates this separation between the left foot and the shadow on the left hand shadow on the left hand side of the foot. We have the bottom of the skirt, we have the crook of the arm, and even though we don't get a clean definition of the head, you get enough of that shadow to serve as a counterpoint to that little girl. And that really is at the heart of the image for me. We're getting some great gesture from the woman and the girl, but the shadow creates a third gesture that mirrors that of the girl moving through this hallway. And the other light that's happening here is you get this edge lighting on the left-hand side of what appears to be a doorway, and there's an area like a little shaft of light hitting the wall on the right. Even the wall where the woman is pressing the button, that light is illuminating that area, and where she's pushing on that button, creating a really nice break up of the areas on the right and the far left of the frame. So this is a great play of light and shadow, line and shape, and then gesture. We don't have any color here to play with, but it definitely has all the elements that I'm often looking for in order to make an interesting shot. If you just had someone standing there pressing the button, yeah, you would have the line and the shape, the light and shadow. You'd have all those things, but there wouldn't be that added flourish of the gesture. And by the girl playing in the hallway as they wait for the car to come down, it provides that flourish that you're looking for. So don't just think that because you've got an interesting backlit scene and that you're exposing properly and your overall frame is nice, that just having a person within the context of the composition is going to be enough. You've set the stage, but now it's time to wait things out and allow that scene to evolve and change so that when a moment like this reveals itself, you're able to leverage it based on all the other things you've already seen in the composition. Before we get to the next image, I am going to be teaching a workshop in Vancouver, Canada at the end of August with my friend Olaf Sztaba. It's going to be an amazing workshop. I don't know if you all know Olaf. He has a YouTube channel. He teaches workshops all over the world, and he's one of my favorite photographer friends. He's amazingly talented, and I just love spending time with him. And we just thought, if we're going to get together in Vancouver, let's open it up to include other people so we can, share a great photographic experience in one of Canada's most beautiful cities. So if you're interested and you're available to come out, please join us. You can get more details by going to visualpoetexperience.com. Next, we have a shot by Michael Kowalczyk. This was created with a Ricoh GR2 at 3/20th of a second at f16 ISO 100. So here we have a shot where the photographer is literally shooting into the light. We see the sun above the buildings that is creating this flare through the lens of the camera. We also have a secondary light flare here, which I think is the sunlight being reflected off something on the roof line that's creating these sort of twin stars within the composition. And then you have this person at the center of the frame that is moving through the scene. Again, they're largely silhouetted, but you can see parts of their body as they move through the frame. It's really hard from taking a look whether or not they're moving forward or back, because what's happening is that there are other figures in the background. You can see a shadow in the lower left-hand corner. Not the lower left-hand corner, but in the lower middle towards the left, that's someone else who's in front of this figure, and then you see a foot to the right of the figure, and they're also casting a shadow. It's really kind of an interesting shot. You see some cars in the background. You see another man who looks to have a beard moving through the scene. So there are a variety of different people moving through the scene, but the dominant figure is that figure in the middle. And again, because of the way the camera is metering the scene, a lot of things are being rendered into deep shadow, and especially the central figure and some of the other elements into silhouette. And again, we're not seeing a dramatic flourish like we did in the second shot with the girl, but you can see how those shadows, especially that foot on the slightly off-centered to the right, really become really interesting elements in the frame. And then you have this smoke, or it looks like smoke that's coming from somewhere on the right-hand area of the frame, which helps fill in what otherwise might be areas of really dark shadow. You can see on the far left, you have a counterpoint to that, which seems to be like signage or a doorway with a letter I above it. And you can see how most of the building here is relegated to shadow, but you have those little spots of light that are illuminating those different elements towards the center of the frame. And even though they're very different physical objects, they play off of each other and help to frame the figure in the very center of the frame. And then you have those implied diagonal lines, not only of the roof line at the top of the frame of the buildings on the left and on the right, but you also get those implied diagonals occurring at the bottom of the frame, created by the transition between light and shadow, which create this triangle and basically these arrows that keep leading us to the very center of the frame. And that shape, those implied diagonals and triangles, repeat themselves over and over and over in the frame. Even the flare that's created by the sunlight creates these repeating triangles that I always enjoy seeing in a lot of photographs. And this is a scene that even without people would be a really interesting stage upon which to create just a photograph. But you can see how the presence of people, especially these odd elements like the foot, the figure in the center, the person walking from the left, and those little accents of the flare, of the smoke, the doorway on the left, add a complexity and a richness to the image that otherwise if it were missing, wouldn't make the shot as engaging and as interesting for me as that does here. So a lot of people will think, oh, when the light sucks, or when they don't have an interesting scene, that there are no pictures to be had, and they just put the cameras away and they stop looking. And for me, if you're outside or even if you're inside somewhere, always be aware of what's happening with the light, because you'll find scenes like this outdoors, indoors, or in transitions from indoors to outdoors. And if you have a keen eye, you can recognize the potential of such moments and make a really, really interesting photograph. All right, I hope you found that helpful. If you found the Candid Frame by visiting this YouTube channel, the Candid Frame is actually my podcast, which I've been doing for over 13 and a half years now, in which I feature conversations with some of the world's best photographers, not just street photographers, but portrait photographers, rock and roll photographers, portrait photographers. And I have over 476 interviews as of now. Our most recent conversation was with Michael Beninoff. He is a writer and a photographer, and he has a keen interest in nomadic people. And his most recent book, Himalaya Bound, it tells the tale of these nomadic people called the Vangajar, who live in northern India. And their way of life is being threatened as a result of the creation of national parks in India, which restricts their access to meadowlands that they've used for generations to help care and feed their buffalo, on which they rely on for their subsistence. He's a wonderful writer. He's also a wonderful photographer, and he went on this journey with these nomadic people, and it is an amazing tale. I read the book from cover to cover, really enjoyed it, and then I had the pleasure of interviewing him to find out more about not only this book, but a lot of the work that he's done over the years. And if you've never listened to the Candid Frame, I really suggest you listen to this episode, and hopefully you'll like it enough to listen to the entire, not to the entire, but a lot of the archive that we have available to you. And you can go there by simply visiting thecandidframe.com. And if you like this video and you like what you're seeing here, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.